evening and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining Quantum Mutual Fund's webinar. My name is Raina Shivdasani and I will be hosting the session. The topic for today is 10 Charts, One Growth Story, India. I would like to begin by introducing you to our speakers for this evening. Mr. Arvind Chari has joined us as a guest speaker and he is the Chief Investment Officer for Quantum Advisors. Along with him, we have Mr. Saurabh Gupta, Fund Manager Equity, Quantum AMC. Before we begin the session, I would like to request you all to plug in earphones for an optimal listening experience and ensure you are connected to the Zoom audio. Over to you, Arvind.
Raina, thank you so much. Good evening and welcome to all those who have joined. Really thank you for joining this webinar. We know these are tough times. Many families and many friends are impacted and we are going through tough times. So it's good to see all of you in, and we really wish and pray for the health and well-being for your family, your friends and your colleagues. So with that, the way we'll do this webinar is it's in two parts. So I will first talk to you about the main part, which is why is India still a growth story? And I'll try and take you through 10 simple charts on why we believe so and what are the risks and what are the opportunities. And then Saurabh will talk to you about the near-term outlook in terms of the equity markets. What do we see in equities? What do we think is going to pan out? And we want to keep this interactive. We'll try and wrap up our slides as soon as you can. And then you can ask us any question that you want. And we will be here till the time the last question is being answered. So, you have enough time. Do not worry about that. And please feel free to ask your questions. If you're shy to ask it, then you can, put it on the chat, put it on the message, and we will try and take as many questions as we can. So with that, let's get started. So this is a fairly long-term chart of India's GDP growth. The blue line is what we call the nominal GDP, which includes inflation, and the red line is the GDP, real GDP growth. Fairly long period. If you see over the last 7-8 years, that both the lines are sloping down. Of course, the drop is because of COVID, so ignore that. But if you look at the lines from 2011 till 2020, it's been sliding down, which is basically India's growth has been going down. And in the last 2-3 years, we've had problems where it has been below what India's long-term potential is, and multiple reasons for this. And we've spoken about this, we've written about this for a lot of time, and we've been very critical of some of these things. And if you look at the last 5 years, starting with the shock and the disaster of demonetization, and we still believe that even prior to COVID, the economy was reeling under the shocks of demonetization. And then came GST. Maybe good, but there are a lot of good things and bad things about GST. But the way it was implemented, the support that the impact that it had on small businesses was higher. And if you then go ahead and look at the IL&FS crisis, the government actually didn't really do enough to save the economy from the IL&FS crisis. The credit crisis impacted a lot of small businesses, NBFCs, and the response that the government should have had didn't come about. And that had an impact, and that led to another slowdown. And finally, COVID. You might argue on how the government has reacted, and the economic growth or recovery has been much better than many anticipated. But still, the recovery is two-paced, right? There are people who have lost jobs, there are people who have lost incomes, or they have got jobs, but they're still earning lesser. And that impact, if it continues and if it remains like that, can have an impact on long-term economic growth. We still believe that the Atmanirbhar package should have had more money being given as cash outages to all these people who have lost their jobs or lost their incomes, or self-employed people. We didn't see that. So, multiple things have happened over the last 4-5 years, which is why we've seen the drop in the GDP growth. And as policymakers, as governments, and as economists, you need to avoid these mistakes, especially these shocks like demonetization and stuff like that. You need to avoid those things to ensure that the economy remains in a trajectory which is upwards and people get jobs and more income. And we'll see how, despite this, despite what we have seen in the last 4-5 years in terms of India's GDP growth being below 4% prior to COVID, why do we still think that India has the potential? And if done, taken the right decisions and done rightly, we can have a better outcome. The chart on the left shows how China did that. China made investments for a long period of time, and then it had growth. India started to do that, but investments is main thing. India has to invest. It has to figure out mechanisms to attract long-term capital and also domestic capital to be able to have that sustainable long-term growth. And when you have long-term growth along with long-term savings, so if I've taken three countries: China, which is red, Korea, South Korea, which is in gray, and India, which is in blue. And I've taken these countries as an example because these are the two countries which grew at 8, 9, 10% for a sustainable period. And they saw an increase in savings rate, like the amount of savings that the domestic economy has, and the amount of investments that it makes. And these two essentially, drives and sustains growth over a period of time. The important thing to see is that the Indian blue line also has gone up. It went up and then it has slowed down. So what happens? What drives growth? What sustains growth? And we will see through our charts why we believe that India can also follow this path. May not be at the same pace, may not be at the same extent, may not be at the same growth level, but India can have a sustainably higher growth than other emerging market countries or other countries. This is again a very long period, goes back to 1500 to show that India and China had a very large share of the economy. And as demographic change and as trading patterns change and as the economy went to a different cycle, that share kept on going below. And hopefully, and the expectation is that over a long period of time, China has already taken a larger share of the global economy, and we will see why India can also do it. And India will also take part in that. The pace and the extent depends on whether we get everything right, but still the trajectory is there to see that India will play a very large part of the global economy, and investors cannot ignore India. This again is another chart, 40-year data, and we have split this data, and many who have seen quantum path to profit attended before would have seen this chart. This is the 20-year GDP, 40-year GDP broken into governments. And it tells 2-3 very clear things. It does not matter which government is in power, whether it is a coalition government or a single party government, whether it's a BJP government or a Congress government or a left government, it really does not matter. Over a long period of time, India's GDP growth actually has remained average above that 6% level. We in fact joke, or actually it's also true that if you look at these patterns, there are times when coalition governments in India have actually had higher growth than single party governments. The 2014-2019 period actually is a testament to that, where if there has been a coalition government, demonetization would have never happened. No chance of it happening. So certain decisions that a single party government can take, which can be disastrous. It can do good things, but it also do bad things. In India, coalition governments has worked better. What it also says is that in the last 40 years, we've seen everything, right? Prime ministers being assassinated, global leaders being assassinated, global financial crisis, India having poor monsoons, wars, nuclear attack. Everything has happened in the last 40 years that has to happen, like with epidemics, pandemics. But still the GDP growth has maintained average above 6%. And this is the hope. And we are saying that India's reforms will make India the next China. Maybe not in the next China. I mean, we are not saying that India will be able to grow at that double-digit growth that China did. Looks very difficult. India has very different. India has a democracy. Things don't move as fast. We have to get many things in terms of reforms, political actions, government, legislations, bureaucracy right to be able to do it. But still, even a 6.5% growth can create a lot of opportunities for investors going forward. Couple of slides on you all would have heard that India's demographics plays a big role. We actually have also said that India's demographic dividend may be actually a curse because you need to create jobs. But what happens is the top panel is India and the bottom panel is China. And as the dependency ratio, the number of percentage of population dependent on others, as that reduces, which is the blue line for India, savings increases. People who are earning do not need to spend so much on that percentage of population, and slowly and steadily the savings increases. You've seen that in China also. As that has sort of peaked out for China, their savings ratio also has come down. This is one benefit. So India has another 10-15 years where the dependency of the less than 15 years and above 65 years will go down as a share of population. So more people who are earning will be able to save and then save and invest. Similarly, if you look at the other part, the 15 to 65 years, this is the working population. These are the people who go out to work, they have their businesses, they are earning. And as their share of the working age population to the total population increases, it increases income. So savings increases, incomes increases. And India, again, as compared to China, is, if you see already the line has peaked out, right? It's topped out or, curved down, where their share of working age 15 to 64 is, as a percentage of population, is going down. India, as I said, maybe has another 10 to 15 years for this trend to play out. And if you're able to create jobs and if you're able to draw in investments, that will boost income and savings. And when savings and income increases, look at this S curve. This is per capita income of the different countries, depending on when they started the reforms and where we are currently. So just in your mind, if you've visited these countries or if you know about these countries, think about what all facilities, what all services, what all goods, what all education levels are prevalent in a country like Malaysia or China or Korea and Taiwan, right? India will likely take this path. Might not be the same, as I said, pace might be different, the extent might be different, but India is very much likely to take this path. Now, India's per capita income is 1.5 lakh rupees for annual income per person. That's very, imagine if that average income of 1.5 lakh rupees per person increases to 4.5, 5 lakh rupees. What is that Mr. X or Mrs. X in India likely to do with that money? Like, where are they going to spend? So this is when, as incomes increase, it creates opportunities. Look at the amount of money that is coming into Indian consumer, right? Flipkart, Baidu, Ola, or the Oyo rooms. All these are for future consumption. As incomes increase, many more people will be able to afford these services, and that creates opportunity. So, and when investors, global investors especially, see opportunities, they invest. So China got significant amount of, as the left chart shows, foreign direct investments in greenfield manufacturing, investment in capacity, investment in land and building. And the right chart is portfolio flows, investment into the equity markets, investment in the debt markets. It's been a significant increase. India should also follow that. And think about it, three different things. Think about geopolitically and think about China. China has already kind of peaked out its overall growth, right? So they do not need as much foreign investments as they needed 20 years back. Think geopolitically, especially after coronavirus. In the last 4-5 years, there's been a lot of US-China trade tensions. If you're a global organization, where are you likely to invest if you do not want to invest in China? India has not taken that place yet. Other smaller countries are taking it, but India can take that place of getting more investments globally from global investors into India. Look at portfolio. We just put out a note on the Quantum Advisors website on that. If you look at the overall total wealth, global wealth is about $250 trillion, right? And if you look at the total investments in India, portfolio equity, debt, private equity, venture capital, real estate, infra, you put everything, it is less than 0.3%. So total pool of assets, less than 0.3% of the total pool of assets is invested in India today. India's share of GDP is about 2.5%. So even if a global investor is thinking that, okay, in the next 15, 20 years, if I want to invest in a country which has high growth, has high consumption, has high opportunity, which is that country? And so they need to increase their allocation. So if India does basic reforms, continues its basic reforms and does not do anything shocking, we should be able to attract these investments and these investors. And then as that money comes, as I showed you, savings increases, investments increases, and the growth sustains over a long period of time. So India has that opportunity to attract that investment. The good thing about the Indian stock markets, because we're now going to talk about, Saurabh is going to talk about stock markets, is that as growth increases, it also shows up in corporate earnings. So companies also benefit, listed companies especially, benefit from the growth that is happening in the economy. And that growth in earnings gets reflected in the stock market. So stock market returns, stock market rewards companies which are growing faster than the economy, which has more, which are efficient. This need not be true. Like in China, for a long period of time, that has not been true. Growth has been very, very high, but Chinese stock market returns, listed stock market returns or index hasn't given that much returns. In India, that's as this chart shows, it's rebased EPS, GDP, and then Sensex. The increase in GDP growth in the economy leads to increase in corporate profitability and leads to increase in stock market returns over a period of time, which allows us to make this very simple assumptions that having what I said, and then if India really just does basic reform, does not aim for that 10%, 12% growth, it cannot happen. We didn't believe in the 9% growth during the BRIC era of 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007. And we continue to believe that India can grow at that 6.5% over a long period of time. So if India indeed does that, so 6.5% GDP growth, you add inflation, as I said, real to nominal, so 5% inflation, GDP growth is 11.5%. If the economy is growing at 11.5%, company sales can grow at 11.5%. Better companies, better managed, good governance, good products, brand, they will definitely be growing at a faster pace than the economy. So they can grow at a slightly higher pace. So as I showed you in the chart, long-term GDP growth leads to long-term corporate earnings. In short term, you might see volatility, but over the long term, this has held true for a long period of time. You can make in your mind, this is not we are not guaranteeing a return. We are not saying this has always come true, but this is in your framework, in your mind to figure out, if I invest in equities over the next 10, 15, 20 years, what is the likely return that I can get from that? In fixed income, it is very clear. When you invest in a fixed deposit, you know that you're going to get 8%. What is that return in equities? Can this change? Now, if that 6.5% GDP becomes 4, of course your returns are going to be lower. If the 6.5 becomes 8, the returns could be higher. This is just a framework for you to work on. With that, I'll call Saurabh to talk to specific about the short term in terms of equity markets, and I'll be around to answer your questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Arvind. Thank you for the macro part of the presentation. So, Arvind just covered the longer term aspect of equity markets, and we understand that there'll be questions in investors' mind in this environment. So we just thought to pick up some few pertinent questions and just talk about them so that people feel just convey our thoughts on these matters. So clearly, first is the COVID second wave, or can we call it a tsunami that has come. Had you seen this chart about a month ago, it was very, very comfortable in February, and kind of India was still cruising along. It was one of the kind of best performing in terms of controlling the COVID wave, but these things have changed very rapidly. So you look at this blue line, the sharp blue line that has moved up. So we are having now close to 300,000 cases every day. It's higher than what the US had in its real peak. It lasted for a few days there, and here it seems to just heading to the hinterland. So this is a big challenge now. Every person was expecting a good recovery from what happened last year. If you look at the daily new infection rate, which was like 16,000 odd in February 28th, we are now 300,000, as I said. Vaccines are coming. Vaccines are, we're doing close to 3 million vaccines a day. In a week's time, we are doing it at a speed where the whole Canada can be vaccinated in a week. But the fact is that we are not Canada, we are 1.3 billion people. So how does it augur? So the question in mind of investors and everyone is that, does it mean with lockdowns coming and COVID coming so sharply, does it mean that markets are going the way it happened in March 2020? Now, so kind of deja vu feeling, but now, one thing which is different, or maybe two things which are very different from last time and this time, is that the element of surprise is lacking. So most people at the individual level, at the corporate level, at the government level know what are the SOPs, or standard operating procedure, and these things happen. So that helps. The element of surprise or uncertainty is one thing which markets don't like, and it doesn't give you time to prepare, but this is not that time, right? So that is one aspect which is a little better, if I can say so, in this environment. The second aspect seems like the problem is a little localized to India or few emerging markets. So developed markets are doing better. They are vaccinating better. So companies which are focused on exports and export related markets or commodities which rely on China doing well or Western entities, industrial economies doing well, they will continue to perform well, which will give support. So first of all, these times till now, the lockdowns have been a little more stringent, sorry, a little less stringent, if I can say so, and more localized. So there will not be a widespread total India lockdown as of now. So that is helping. Corporate balance sheets are very much better. Now, what has happened over last 1 year is that corporates have focused on debt reduction, improving liquidity, and reducing cost. So they are much healthier to handle a down cycle. So we believe that this is one thing that is helping the market show some resilience till now. Last whole year has been about cost control and business continuity. Whenever we met the managements, we have talked to the management, that has been the core focus. They're working on very low cost, and so they're working very efficiently. The risk would come as far as NPAs are concerned on the financial side, financials being a little leverage sector. But here again, if you look at the capital raise that they have done over last 6 months, all the private banks and NBFCs have raised capital, and they are one of the best capitalized in last 10 years, if I can say so, and even more. So most of the banks are closer to tier 1 capitals of 20%, 18%, wherein the minimum requirement is 5 to 6%. Plus they have provided aggressively in terms of what could go wrong in terms of provisions, and they are very well provided as well. Global recovery I touched upon. If it holds on, then exporting companies will do well, and even commodity companies should do well. So broadly, what we feel is that markets look to be better placed till now compared to what happened last year. But then the question is that how bad things can be from here on. Arvind touched upon the unemployment rates a bit, unemployment that happened last year and how it can impact the demand and other things. So these are the two charts which I'd like to highlight upon if things go bad. So whenever an economic cycle happens, there are few things which revert very quickly, but non-farm jobs are something which are very sticky. Once they go out, it's not easy to come back. So if you look at this red line on the left chart that you see, it's the people employed in salaried jobs. So look at March 2020, it fell off the cliff. The recovery is not as good as it should be for the economy, for the demand or consumption to recover. So it's been slow. Despite economy recovering sharply, the job creation has been slow. People who have lost job at the salaried sector has not managed to get job. What they have done is at the lower level, they've moved to seasonal jobs in farming, which has seen a spike. Maybe some bit of Manrega has helped at the lower end. But overall, they've settled for lower income jobs, and their ability to consume has been compromised. Similarly, if you look at the charts on the right side, it shows a very similar picture. People employed in farming activities has fallen off the cliff. The pink line, if you see, it's fallen off the cliff in 2020, and in 2021 it has improved, but again in April started to show down. So that is the big risk. These type of macro risks or macro shocks which come, the unemployment comes along with it. And as Arvind highlighted, the fiscal boost that has been given, it's more on the supply side. And the problem with the supply side boost is that it will come with a lag. So there is no immediate demand which is coming, no new factories are being set up. So this is one of the concerns. And if there is a lockdown again, then it will be a problem to recover. So just to continue to what happens when these type of shocks happen in the economy, we've just tried to answer second question, which is in investors' mind: is this environment good for mid-cap, small-cap investing, or large-cap should be the focus? What happens when these type of shocks happen for a long-term investor? Right? So we have carved out this data from CMIE, which highlights that smaller companies are suffering the most in these type of macro shocks. So if you look at the slide on the left, or the chart on the left, you see that net sales, how they have fallen. Each of these graphs show the top 10. So the leftmost chart shows the top 10% of the companies, how they have performed, the next 10% of the companies, and D10 is the last 10% of the companies or the corporates, how they have done. So if you look at the smallest of the companies have suffered the most in this. So it's declined by close to 60% decline in sales. Wage bill, if you see, is down by 30-40% for these companies. So clearly small is suffering, and that is a big challenge. And the job creation or the most of the employment creation happens at the SME level or the companies which are not very mechanized. So this is a big challenge that is happening. But if you look at the cost controls that Indian listed companies have done, if you look at the chart on the right side, in terms of profits, it's been one of the best quarters for companies. That's driven by large companies. If you look at the profitability, that has just shot up this year. That is because severe cost controls have happened, salaries have been cut, and costs have been put in place. When the demand came back, the profitability just shot up. So it's one of the best profitability in 14-15 years which the companies have shown. Moving to the next slide. Again, continuing with the same topic, look at the sales growth difference between the top 3 deciles. Top 3 deciles means the top 30% of companies, their sales were growing in June 10 at 20%. Right? The bottom 3 decile means the last 30% of the companies were growing at 10%. So the difference was close to 10%. Now, if you come to the latest reports that have come in, and I'm talking about the left side of the chart, the sales growth is closer to 0% for top 30% of the companies, but it is minus 40% for smaller companies, right? So the difference of 10% has gone to 40%. So these are the shocks which makes it very difficult for smaller companies to survive, but large gets larger because they have the wherewithal to handle these kind of crises. Their balance sheets are stronger, their reach is stronger, their scale helps them to achieve better results. Similarly, larger companies, because they have wherewithal, they have been investing better than the smaller companies. And the chart on the right, you can see clearly that on a YOY basis, the blue line reflects how top 30% of the companies have been investing in capital assets. Vis-a-vis, it's been a degrowth for bottom 30% of the companies. Now, the question to ask is that most of the people think that small cap investing or mid cap investing can give you better results. But if you look at long-term chart, what I've shown last 10-15 years, what is happening is that big is getting bigger and stronger. Over long term, this gets reflected in equity returns as well. So you see that saffron line that you see is the BSE Sensex, which represents the large companies, and the red line and the green line showcases the BSE small cap companies, right? So over long periods of time, we have seen the Sensex tends to outperform mid and small. There could be periods like from FY13 to FY17 or 18, wherein the mid and small did well, but over long periods of time, because the structural trend is that large is getting larger and strong is getting stronger, the larger companies are expected to do better than small companies. Now I'll just touch upon the valuations because I think that would be important aspect not to miss. From a valuation perspective, Sensex looks like closer to 40x based upon FY21 earnings, and even the mid cap index looks pretty expensive. But then we should not ignore a fact that last year about 1/4 of earnings were lost because of lockdown. So that is actually overstating the PE ratios of these indexes, right? So if I normalize that, if I say if the normal earnings were normalized, this index would look, Sensex would look to closer to 22-23 times. Though it will not be cheap, but it will not be overtly expensive as been seen in this chart right now. Now, one more important question, we being value managers over last few years, we have been asked that will value style perform? So 2018, 2019 has not been a great period for value managers. So answer lies in history. Basically, there are periods and economic cycles where value does well, and there are periods where growth does well. So I have put in some long-term charts to reflect the same fact, and I'll just try to highlight what kind of environment is required for a value manager to outperform. So this is a value versus growth chart. The blue line that you see is value, and the orangish line that you see is world growth kind of strategies, how they have done. So we don't have local data, India data for this. So that's why we are relying on the international data. So from 2000 to 2010, you can clearly see that value has outperformed in that 10-year period. So it's clearly outperformed by a big margin compared to growth. Right? So how was the environment at that point in time? The environment in that period was growth where global GDP was growing faster. There was a commodity bull cycle, inflation was there, interest rate cycles were normal. And in this environment, when cyclicals do well, the value managers tend to outperform. Now come to the next slide. What happened between 2010 and 2020, just preceding decade? If you could see, till 2014-15, it was okay. But post that, when the GDP starts to slow down, but there is a lot of liquidity and few companies do well. So there is a clear polarization that starts to happen because only few companies gain market share, and because there is liquidity, a lot of people want to chase those stocks. The growth managers start to do well and value lacks over here. So that is the primary study that we have done over last 20 years about when value did well and when growth did well. So coming to 2021, how are things stacking up for value managers? The start off has been good. So 4 months chart that we have given, we clearly see that value started to outperform the growth indices globally. The reason being, if you see post-COVID, there has been an economic recovery that was not seen for 4 or 5 years. So there has been global recovery, there has been a commodity recovery, there has been recoveries in financials. So that normalized economic recovery with inflation coming back and expectation of interest rate normalizing is leading to pick up in the performance of value managers basically across the board. So from here on, if the recovery continues and earning upgrades continue, we believe value managers will continue to do well. But if then again it moves back to the same story that the growth is not there, but there is liquidity, and then again a lot of liquidity tries to chase few stocks, then there will be difficult time for value managers. But as of now, the indication suggests that it appears to be a normal economic recovery where cyclical should do well, and interest rate cycles should be normal, and inflation cycle should be normal. The value managers should tend to outperform going forward. Now I'll just discuss two parts of why diversification is important. I talked about mid and small caps. I talked about value and other styles. So we have pulled out some data, and we have seen that there is no specific strategy or no certain cap category which performs in all kind of periods, right? So if you look at CY16, I've circled that in red. Value was one of the good performers. YTD, again, value is a good performer, but in between few years were not good for value. Similarly, large cap was good for CY19 and CY18. These are all calendar year, absolute that year data. It's not a CAGR data that we are presenting. Similarly, mid cap did well in CY17 and CY20. So it becomes very important for any equity investor to create a basket of kind of styles and caps, right? So ideally, what we suggest is that you should have an anchor value product as your anchor in terms of equity equity investment. It should be closer to 20% of your all equity allocation. And around that, you can build in special funds like ESG closer to 10%, and 70% should be allocated in different style and different caps, so that when there are periods of underperformance in a specific style or a specific cap, your portfolio does not underperform. Now, I talked about diversification within equities, but there is also a glaring need for diversifying across asset cycles. Now, this is extremely important, as I think 2020 was a year which was a classic example why asset-wise classification, diversification is so important. So first half of 2020, anybody who had only equities and zero gold must have been looking like a fool, right? On the contrary, on the second half of the year, if you had 100% equity and zero gold, you would be one of the smartest ones, smartest investors. Now, what happens is that you cannot just time the markets like this. So it is always important to have a mix, right? A mix of gold, a mix of bond, if you understand bonds, or at least some liquid investments that that you require for problems that occurred last year in terms of job losses and illnesses and other things. And definitely equity for your long-term capital gains return that you want for your long-term financial goals. So these things would be very specific to an individual's need and his ability to handle volatility and other things. But broadly, these three you should not be focused on one asset class, but you should diversify across asset classes. that makes really helpful. So ideally, close to 6 months to 12 months of your monthly expenses should be parked in liquid fund, a very safe liquid fund, or if you are comfortable with a bank FD. Then rest of it, little portion which you need within 3 years should be parked into a multi-asset or a debt product if you understand that. And rest for long-term financial goals, you should park your money into equities. And any time you should be closer to 5 to 10% should be in gold, because gold is kind of a insurance against everything in the world going wrong, which we saw last year. And as of now also we are seeing that, at least from India's perspective. Coming to our value product, Quantum Long-Term Equity Value Fund, it's a value-oriented product. We launched it in 2006. I'll just give you a very quick brief. I'll not go into details in the interest of time. So typically the portfolio we try to create is of 25 to 40 stocks across industries, a strong focus on corporate governance and quality businesses, bought at a good margin of safety. We have a very strong research and investment process, which we have presented many times, and we also present in future in detail. So you can attend one of our Path to Profit specific to Quantum Long-Term Equity Value product, and we'll make you understand how our process works. We have a very low turnover because we look at long term. We are not trying to make money in a quarter's time. We try to buy companies for at least a 2-year perspective. And we, if there is value, we'll be buying equities. If there is no value, we'll sit in cash. So it's a very simple way of managing money. As of now, our portfolio position is positioned towards recovery. But still, despite positioning towards recovery, we are ensuring that we do not keep a tab on the risk. So we are ensuring that we don't face a permanent loss of capital in any of our investments. So that is the primary focus. Our focus has been, so portfolio is positioned towards recovery in rural, where the winter crops have been good. Monsoon is expected to be good. So few stocks will do well from that perspective. They will benefit from there. We bought some of the stocks we bought in last year's fall, some high quality names in different sectors we bought. They have done well for us. We continue to hold them. We believe they are in for good times going forward. We run a higher weights in NBFC, consumer discretionary and IT. We did a stress test when last year things were falling. We did a stress test for all our company balance sheets, and was wondering whether companies could survive the kind of down cycle. So simply put, what we did was we assumed that there will be no revenues for companies for 2 months, and the cost will continue as it has been continuing. So when we tested that, almost all of our companies did well, in sense they could survive that kind of stress test. Only few companies did not pass, at least one company, but it has a very strong parentage. So my equity can be infused through parents. So we were quite comfortable with that. Even now, as we speak, we are doing that stress test again, so that we ensure that the risk we defined this is permanent loss of capital does not happen in the portfolio. So without compromising on the quality of the portfolio in terms of risk, we are focusing on the economic recovery, and portfolio should benefit out of that. We have closer to 6.5% cash in the portfolio, which we will deploy in case of a sharp correction. And if we are able to buy some good names at good prices, we will deploy that cash. Just to summarize on the risk, what could happen going forward to 2021 from an equity perspective? Boom, some of it started to play out. Real economic activities continue to improve. There are corporate earnings upgrade that has happened. And after quite a few years that these kind of earning upgrades have happened, though driven by cost controls, but yes, so that if that continues, it's good news for equity investors. Real estate revival, we saw because of stamp duty cuts and discount by real estate developers, there has been some movement in real estate, which could spur demand, because real estate has a very large multiplier effect. So I believe that that could have, if it continues, it will have a positive rub-off on the demand and overall equity returns. Foreign flows, I think Arvind has talked about it in detail, what can happen if foreign flows improve, and we expect that it to improve. Bust is that poor government policy. We have seen some examples like demonetization, quick, hastily implemented GST. So these are things we need to be careful about. And resurgence in COVID cases and poor execution of vaccine rollout. This has already happened. We believe that this kind of risk gets arrested soon. If that happens, if it continues, then there will be a trouble for equity markets. And rising inflation is a worry because India imports a lot of crude oil and other things. So if there's a lot of import of inflation, then there will be interest rate hikes, and the recovery will be nipped in bud. I think that's about it from an equity presentation perspective, and we can open up for question and answers. Over to Raina.
Thank you, Saurabh. Thanks, Arvind. Before jumping into the Q&A session, I quickly want to introduce the SMILE facility to all of you, an initiative between Quantum Mutual Fund and Help Your NGO. This facility enables an investor, on the basis of his or her consent, to contribute some percentage of their investment with Quantum Mutual Fund towards a charitable cause to any NGOs registered with the Help Your NGO Foundation. To know more about this, visit our website and check out our FAQs on SMILE or reach out to customer care. Now we'll begin the Q&A session, requesting all participants who have any questions to please send them in through the chat box. So the first question we have, Arvind, is for you. What impact will the second wave of COVID have on the speed and shape of India's economic recovery?
Yeah, this question is there on everybody's mind, right? So there will be some impact, because if you look at that chart that Saurabh shared about the pace of the increase and the extent of the increase of coronavirus, it's been quite significant. Right? So we've already seen mini lockdowns or mini containments, and in fact, some states have also done it. Although companies and individuals are better prepared today, they have, like in individuals and companies, we have all these Zoom facilities online to do it. Factories have still not been shut down. So factories are still working, public transport is still working. But there will be some impact because, consumption slows down during this period. Everybody's kind of main focus becomes the health and well-being of family, friends, and, and colleagues and all those. That'll get impacted. And if the government across center and state do the same mistake that they did in the first lockdown in terms of how do they deal with migrants, if migrants again start going back, and we have seen that, how do they protect their income, whatever they lose, how do they quickly share? Once that is clear, then maybe they can control the impact of the pandemic. But otherwise, whatever we're expecting the recovery to happen, maybe it will slow down, but it won't be as bad as what we saw in the first quarter of 2021. So, but you should expect some slowdown. In the long term, it really depends. I mean, with whatever has happened globally. So if you look at the global response to coronavirus has been significant, right? If you look at numbers, central banks around the world have kind of printed more than $10 trillion of money, and governments around the world have ensured that their fiscal deficit increases by about $10 trillion. And many governments, including India, have said that they will continue to increase their fiscal deficit and spend more to revive growth. This is significant. This has not happened since 2010. After 2011-12, all governments cut their fiscal deficit, and that's why you also saw global growth slow down. Here, every government is saying that I don't really care about debt levels. I want first to ensure that growth comes back and people have jobs and incomes are back, and I will spend. That's a powerful thing, and when it occurs around the world. So if you look at India also, Modi government has, I was very surprised they did that they said that till the FY26, which is 5 years out, the fiscal deficit to GDP, which is the extent of revenue minus expenditure, the deficit will remain at 4.5% of GDP as against a target of 3%. So 1.5 percentage points higher, on average about 2 percentage points higher of GDP every year for the next 5 years. That's a significant amount of spending if spent properly in both control, giving people income and giving people jobs, and also boosting capital investment and infrastructure and so on. Social and economic, both sides. They can ensure that economic recovery is safe. But first and foremost priority is they have to get this virus under control.
Okay, thanks, Arvind. There's a follow-up question actually to what you already shared. In your opinion, what incentives and relief packages should the government be releasing to help curb the disastrous situation we are in?
The first, as I said, as I ended my last question, my last answer, the first is they have to control the virus. And more importantly, if you see in the second phase, many tier 2, tier 3 towns also are showing very high level of infection, which was not the case in the first aspect. So the much of the economic recovery that we saw was also due to the fact that the rural economy did not get impacted. And thanks to, two very marquee government policies that we've had, food security, started by the UPA, and Manrega, again started by the UPA, that allowed the government to give food and give work to people. Of course, Jandhan also worked. They could transfer money, right? Rural India did not get impacted. Rural recovery happened. Monsoons were fortunately very good, and then the recovery happened. This time, the infection is spreading in the rural areas also, tier 3 towns, and that's dangerous because health facilities also are not there. Plus, the main strength of the Indian economy is that tier 3 rural area that will get impacted. So they need to really come quickly together to stop the spread of the virus. Second most important thing is there's all this center state nonsense on vaccination should stop. They have to ensure that they have to procure the vaccines and increase production and roll it out in government hospitals for free. This people should be paying for vaccine is just ridiculous. I can afford it. I will go to a private entity and I'll buy the vaccine. But for the bulk of the population, it should be free across for all age groups. Supply is the issue, but they need to really sort this out very quickly because right now the confusion is that between 18 and 45, everybody will have to pay even at the government hospital. That's ridiculous. You can't do that. So they need to come about and get that thing sorted out. Prepare for, we've still again seen the migrants, we've still not learned. Prepare for how you deal with migrants. Now you have Manrega, you have food security, increase the Manrega, start cash transfers. Maybe the time has come that the government has to spend money to ensure that people's incomes are not lost. Because if this sustains, right, if people's incomes go and they lose jobs or they are working at a salary, but they now are self-employed, for them to come back and contribute to the economy takes a lot of time. And we might lose out on that demographic dividend that we are seeing, right? These are all shocks. These shocks have to be controlled and tempered and nurtured in a manner that these do not become a consistent thing. This is only a trend shock. And then as we put in more incomes and as the growth comes and the government spends more money, these people get their jobs and then they come back in the job market and provide and be productive. So I would say these three things. Interest rates, I don't see it going down. In fact, if inflation goes up, maybe interest rates will actually inch up. But control the virus, vaccinate people as fast as you can, free and make it universal, and take care of the economy in terms of providing income support and consumption support.
Okay, thanks, Arvind. Saurabh, the next question is for you. Which sectors are looking attractive to perform well in 2021 and 2022? And a follow-up question is, which category of funds will do better, large cap, mid cap, or small cap? What's your prediction?
Yeah, so in terms of sectors, we are clearly seeing that cyclicals have started to perform with economic recovery in place. Now, this all what I'm saying is subject to COVID problem not extended beyond maybe a month, because then it will just sabotage the whole recovery story, and maybe then there will be focus again on defensives and things like that. But we are still believing that the economic recovery is intact, and with this cyclical recovery coming for not only for 6 months or a year, but at least for a few years, if India's economy continue to recover, we believe cyclicals should do well. Within cyclicals, we believe discretionary, as employment generation improves, the consumer discretionary will start to perform. Even financials should start to perform. As I told them, they are very, very well capitalized, and in terms of financial penetration in India is extremely low. So there is a large opportunity size for private banks to play around with and grow faster than the system credit growth. So those banks should do well, we believe. So it's a good time to bet on them. And unless credit growth improves, the economy cannot grow. And for last few years, credit growth has been really muted. So that is one sector you should look at. Even cyclicals like metals, etc. If there is a demand, global demand, and within India also there is demand, that should also start to perform. So the focus should be on cyclicals more than high quality or maybe defensive names. So within that, we believe global cyclicals, right? IT should also do well, because this environment globally, companies have been focusing on pushing up technology in their respective companies, because that's now become from a discretionary spend to more of a keep the lights on of the company kind of spend. So it's no more discretionary, right? So companies are spending, and you're seeing that in numbers. So these are the few sectors that we believe should continue to do well from here on. Yeah, that's about it. Real estate, we believe that lower interest rates and the stamp duty cut should benefit. But unfortunately, within the Indian listed space, we don't find companies which have good corporate governance and good disclosure standards to play around that. So better would be some mortgage-focused NBFC players that should do well from that perspective. Yeah. So this is the kind of the second part of the question, Raina, I missed out. Can you just repeat that question?
Yeah, which between large caps, mid caps, and small caps, which do you think will perform well in the coming financial year?
No, so equity investment is for more than 3 years perspective. Then only it's an asset class. Otherwise, it's more of a speculative class. So I think people should not focus on speculation. And as I gave you a long-term chart of different indices, Sensex, mid cap, and small caps, over long periods of time, as we said, the larger companies are expected to do better. So we believe Sensex can generate enough returns. Sensex, I mean, large companies should generate enough returns for equity investors. But yes, there could be 3 to 4 year periods where suddenly mid caps do well. So we believe that a basket of a large and good mid and small caps should be a good basket to own. Instead of putting all the money in one basket, one category which performs for a year and it does not perform for 3 years, as it happened for mid caps. They performed in 2017, then they did not perform for 3 years. I believe a basket approach is much better.
Okay. So now, Saurabh, there are a few questions that have come in on QLT EVF.
Sure.
So we'll just address those. One is, could you share some insights on dividend yield strategy? Will QLT EVF increase allocation to FMCG companies if there is healthy correction in the market?
So I'll take up the second question first, and absolutely we'll buy into FMCG names, and we would love to. It's been good 7, 8, 10 years close to that we have bought some good consumer staples, because it's the valuation is just moving away and beyond. So from 40, 50 times, they move to 70, 80 times with not commensurate change in earning profile of these companies. So they are stable, but their growth profiles have not changed as much as the P multiples have changed. And we like these companies. They are good managements, good business models, but valuations is something which is stopping us to buy into these names. If there's a good correction and stocks come into our buy, we'll definitely buy into it. In terms of dividend yield strategy, we do not specifically look at dividend yield strategy, but as a value product, you will find that most of the time our dividend yield at QLTF would be better than the dividend yield of our benchmark, right? So because we try to buy companies at a reasonable margin of safety where dividend yields as a byproduct is better. So that will continue to happen, but we are not specific to look at dividend yield stories, because we believe India is still a story where there is a lot of penetration gaps in different sectors, and a lot of growth stories can be bought. And just to be clear that it's not that value managers don't buy growth companies. They buy growth companies, but with a margin of safety.
Thanks. And will the QLTBF fund look at overseas investment if value propositions are not available or attractive in India?
So as of now, we are not looking any of in terms of these aspects. We believe within India, we have a lot of opportunities. India is like a 4,000, there are over 4,000 listed names. So we are limiting ourselves to liquidity of $1 million, and plus that itself is close to 250, 300 companies. So we believe that our skill set and opportunity size, we can generate enough returns, and there are enough opportunities in Indian markets. So as we are not looking at overseas investment as well.
So next questions for you, Arvind. Will the investment in bonds be more preferable now? Will it continue to give the same rate of return as it is currently?
I'll take in two parts. One is, okay, just addressing that question is, So if you look at when people talk about bonds, it is so many things, right? So we look at fixed income, which could be savings account, fixed deposits, to debt mutual funds, and you buy public bonds, listed bonds that come about. So if you look at long-term bonds, like when people are talking about long-term bonds, is when you buy the 10-year bond, or when you invest in a long-term debt fund or a dynamic bond fund. We've been saying since the last 3-4 months that we've seen the best in terms of returns. So in bonds, when interest rates go down, prices of long-term bonds increase, and that's when you get capital gains. And we've been saying that for the last 3-4 months that phase is over, because if you look at calendar year 2020 returns, it was in double digits. We do not expect that to happen in this year, because we do not expect interest rates to fall by that measure, because in 2020 rates fell from 7% to 5.5%. The repo rate went from 5.5% to 3.5%. That is the kind of interest rate fall that happened. We don't expect that to happen. So that's why we in the debt market observer, Pankaj Pathak has written that best of the bond markets are behind us in terms of returns. But what happens in your allocation? So when interest rates are going up, when the interest rates are likely to rise from a low level, what we've been saying is keep a lot of your money in short-term instruments or short-term or like liquid funds. Because as when the interest rates go up, you can keep repricing it. Do not do long-term investments when interest rates are about to rise. Like don't do a 5-year FD at 6%, because then for the next 5 years, even when interest rates rise, you're stuck with that 6% fixed deposit. Make it shorter. If you're not comfortable with bond funds and liquid funds, make it a fixed deposit, but keep it shorter. But lower your return expectation. Don't try to earn. This is what happened in 2017-18, that people are trying to earn that our demonetization happened and FD rates went down, and people wanted to earn that extra 0.5%, 2%, and they went into corporate to bank FDs, they went into credit funds, and quite a few people lost their money. Right? Fixed income is not for returns generally. Right? It is to keep your portfolio stable. It is to keep your portfolio away from volatility and try to earn that 6-7%. If you look at a 10-year average of bond fund returns in India, it's about 7%, 7.5. I'm not saying it will be the same again, but that's the average. That's where interest rates tend to be over a long period of time. Right now, so because we do not expect rates to fall, we do not expect capital gains, but in like the short-term interest rates, like liquid funds today are earning about 3.5-4%, right? Whereas a 10-year bond is at 6%. FD, like a 2-year, 3-year FD, will be about between 5 to 5.5%. So rates are lower.
Thank you. So Saurabh, the US Federal Reserve has been printing trillions of dollars since the pandemic, which most likely would cause inflation. How will this affect the rupee and our equities?
Okay, I can talk about equities and rupee. I think Arvind is best positioned to answer on rupee dollar. Yeah, yes. Equities, as we told that if the COVID situation normalizes quickly, India will again move to that normalized growth rates of 6.5%, and at that rate, India will be one of the better growing economies in the world, and India will attract capital, because that's the kind of growth rate which will attract capital, because large part of Western world, you're not seeing growth, the population is aging, right? So India continues to have a lot of opportunities for growth, and money should follow where the growth is. From an equity markets perspective, they generally move on two legs. One is earnings upgrades, and liquidity. So we are not too bothered about liquidity, given the thoughts that I just shared. We are just hoping that this equity move that comes from here on is driven by both legs and not only liquidity. So earning upgrades is one thing we are closely following. That has happened over the last 6 months, but from here on, it should be revenue driven. And if these both legs keep running, then we'll have good handsome returns from equity markets in the next few years. So yeah, corporate earnings is a bigger focus for us than liquidity. Arvind, you can answer on rupee dollar.
Yeah, so what happens when global central bankers print money is that money then starts chasing avenues and opportunities and other returns. And that's what you've seen in India, both in the equity markets, in the venture capital, in private equity. We've seen significant inflows coming to India. And that is likely to continue, in the sense that India should be, as I gave you that number, right? global investors are so underallocated to India. They have to every year just keep allocating more and more money to just come to a level where it makes sense in the portfolio. And India is a large economy, as I showed you, the size is there, opportunities there. They cannot ignore it. So that secular trend of money coming into Indian equities, maybe in the as India enters into a Indian bond, global bond index, maybe that money will come in a large manner in the bond markets, private equity, real estate, infrastructure. So that's a secular story will keep playing out. It doesn't and it gets accentuated when global central banks print money. When they tighten that money, some of that short term money will go out, and then you'll see the impact of rupee. The rupee today is very, very tightly managed by the RBI, and what the RBI has done is in the last 1.5 years they've bought up all the dollars that came in, and they've increased the forex reserves. So they have not allowed the rupee to appreciate, which also means that if there is an outflow, let's say this virus just completely goes out of hand and we have a big shock, we have a big economic shock, and the rupee starts depreciating, the RBI can manage that depreciation because they have a very high level of reserve. So the rupee will be in a tight range, managed very strongly by the RBI. In the last 1 month, we have seen a big depreciation, but that's also engineered by the RBI. There was so much short-term carry trade money that had come in. They wanted to shock the market and then give a depreciation. Over a long period of time, as you see in history, the rupee depreciates by about 2 to 3% against the US dollar. And I think that kind of trend will likely to continue unless India's growth picks up so much and we get so much inflows that we are not able to get there. Otherwise, take any government policy today, Atmanirbhar, wanting to do everything in India, make in India and export, all that requires slightly weaker currency. So you should see a marginally depreciating, but very well managed by the Reserve Bank of India.
Okay, great. So now we've got a couple of sector opinions. I will redirect this to either of you or both of you can chime in. So what are your views on, to begin with, the pharmaceutical and specialty chemical sector?
So maybe Arvind, I will take that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so pharma, we have seen some opportunities that came up, and when the sector was not in the limelight about 2 years ago, we also got opportunity to buy into some pharma names which were really attractive. The business proposition continues to be very attractive for pharma in terms of the exports and even in the domestic markets. There are a few headwinds like the FDA that comes up and checks the factories, and this is a very unpredictable things to happen. It's very difficult to predict those things when it happened, but it has been happening more frequently. Second is the pricing erosion that has happened in the US markets on the generic side. So because there was some consolidation on the distributors, there has been the sector has been suffering on those lines. And thirdly, definitely the pricing pressures on the domestic markets because government has capped pricing of few products. So few of the pharma companies are trying to move out to new products. We don't see them going back to the growth rates that we have seen maybe from 2009 to 2013, 14 when they were growing really fast. One is base. Secondly, even the larger opportunity that was for in terms of patent cliff is not anymore. So they have to struggle a little more. There are pockets of opportunities in specific therapies which some companies will benefit, and even biologics is one of the aspects which should benefit. Overall, we believe a kind of mid-teens kind of growth rate for these companies, and if available at good valuations, some of these companies, larger companies, are really well, and they can be bought. So we have bought 2 of them, which we believe can generate good returns over a medium term. On specialty chemicals, the sector has done well. Unfortunately, it's now that these companies have achieved some scale, and prior to that, they were very thinly traded in equity markets. We have been tracking a few of them. We have been meeting the managements, but we are still not convinced about the value proposition that they offer. And over the last 6 years, what has happened is that they have benefited, and most of these specialty chemicals have input from either first order or second order derivatives of crude prices. Right. So they have seen a good margin expansion and their value propositions have improved over 4, 5, 6 years. But we would be a little nervous when crude moves up and their ability to, because these are all B2B businesses, their ability to pass on that and maintain that margins is questionable. So few of the companies are really good. but they are small. They don't fit into our liquidity criteria. We continue to track them as they achieve scale. We will be looking at them if they can come into the portfolio. So one should not look the whole sector that it will do good. There are few companies which can do well. They're positioning themselves right. Some are benefiting from the sector tailwinds, which when goes away, people can stuck because the valuations are not really attractive in that sector anymore.
Thanks. And another sector that views are needed on is the insurance sector, given the LIC mega IPO.
Yeah, so on insurance, there is a very uniqueness of Indian insurance sector. In terms of number of policies issued, we would be one of the highest in the world, first or second. But most of Indian insurance policies are endowment types and not term. So in terms of coverage, India is way, maybe not even the top 10 or top 15. Right? So there is an opportunity in terms of the coverage to increase in insurance, in life insurance sector. But again, what we have seen, despite good growth rates and good opportunity size, we believe that the valuations that they are trading is one of the big risks that these companies have. Now, we have seen in few of the emerging markets where insurance companies were getting listed. For some time, they traded at the valuations where Indian companies are trading at. But over time, over 2-3 years, as that scarcity premium goes away, those valuations go for a toss and they can go off by 40-50%. So one has to be very careful at what prices people are buying it. In terms of LIC, IPO, I don't see that there will be a large rub-off effect, if any, because actually, if LIC comes and they try to gain market share, because they have been losing market share for 10-15 years. And if once they get listed, there will be questions on their growth and market shares by analysts. And if they start to focus on more on growth, there could be tough times for private insurance company to maintain or grow their market shares, which they have been doing relatively easier over the last 5-10 years. So in the near term, there could be some ups and downs based upon where insurance, life insurance corporations IPO is priced. But from a medium term perspective, valuation has to be taken care of when you buy into these names.
Thanks, Saurabh. The next question is, during these uncertain times, would you suggest adopting the STP strategy?
Yes, clearly, and we have, I think Arvind and we both have highlighted there are few things which are clearly unpredictable at this point in time. And valuation is not very attractive. If you see, even if I adjust for that quarter's earning, which was lost, valuations are closer to 23-24 times at the Sensex level. So an STP strategy or SIP strategy and staggered investment is the best way to invest in equities right now. So we would completely agree that STP and a staggered investment is the best way to invest in equities right now.
So Arvind, the next question is for you. As the CIO of Quantum, how do you envision the 3 asset classes of debt, equity, and gold to play out in 2021? And Saurabh, maybe you can chime in for the equity part.
Okay, I'll take a macro view and then I'll give you a
sure.
individual view. It should not matter to you. I mean, in the sense that from your, as an investor, so we actually say when you invest in gold, hope that it falls. Because gold is, again, like as Saurabh said, it's like protection, right? You invest in gold when things go bad. So if you lose your job or the economy is in trouble, gold does well. It did, and it time and again will show you that in 2013, 2019, 20. Equity is your long-term wealth creator, and you need to have it over a period of time. And that is your emergency corpus safety. So if you think about it in this simplistic manner, many want to time it, many want to ensure that they catch the thing at the bottom and play the top. But if you think in a simplistic manner in terms of asset allocation, we won't have to bother about these questions and answers. Specifically, as I said, and I think I also saw another question on interest rate, view on interest rates. I'm just going to combine that. We expect interest to go up because, 3.5% repo rate or reverse repo rate or base rate in a country which averages 5% inflation, which is there currently also. We right now also we are at 5.5% CPI inflation, likely to go up because global commodity prices cannot sustain. we are where we are in terms of interest rates because growth is important, which is true. India has to secure growth, right? Indian growth has to be that 6.5% over a long period of time. Otherwise, the entire problem of poverty, low income, very high population, people needing jobs, it's going to be a very bad scenario for that. So first priority for any government, any policy has to be growth. So they're trying to secure growth for a time, but it cannot remain like this. Interest rates will have to move up. Short-term interest rates will move up. Long-term interest rates, right now the RBI is trying to manage the long-term interest rates. We don't see it going up by too much, but even then, even they will increase. So if you look at what we call as the curve, right? The yield curve is what is called as steep. So the 1-year rate is at 3.5, between 3.5 and 4%, and the 10-year rate is at 6%. That's the difference between the short-term interest rate and the long-term interest rate. We expect short-term interest rates to move up by more, long-term interest rate not by much. So as I told you, when short-term interest rates move up, do not park in or lock in too much money in the longer or in long-term fixed income instruments. Keep it short, allow the accrual to keep increasing. So if you keep in a liquid fund, today the repo rate is at, reverse repo rate is at 3.5%. Say 1 year later, the reverse repo rate moves to 4.5%. And the returns on the liquid fund will kind of match that level. So you, as interest rates go up, you keep earning slightly higher and higher yield. If you are not bothered and you can stay invested for a 3-year period, then consider like a medium-term debt fund or a dynamic bond fund that we have. Equities, very difficult to say on a yearly basis, right? And suddenly you will, if this COVID goes out of hand, you will see a correction. But how you behaved and reacted in 2020 will determine what kind of investor you are. So if you are the investor who invested in March and April and May and June, when the markets were at low levels, that's the best, right? So at that time, when the markets cracked by so much, if you would have not done STP but also put lump sum, that shows you that angle, right? As from valuation perspective, as Saurabh said, it is expensive, but there are if you see the cash levels of the quantum portfolio, it's below the average, which sort of tells you that as the economy recovery is two-paced, so have been the stocks, right? Some stocks are still giving value despite the overall markets being at peak. So allow the fund manager to decide where they want to allocate. From a personal perspective, very difficult to give a view. From a macro perspective we are looking at is that, can this growth be sustained? And if we are constantly challenging ourselves and looking at government policies saying that, will they do enough for the rural India and for the people who are losing their jobs and income to ensure that this growth remains sustained? Because if this growth remains sustained, then as I showed all the charts and the tables, the equity returns will follow. But that is the key. They have to, ensure that this growth in India that is there sustains over a period of time.
Thanks. So Saurabh, there is another question that's come in 2 parts. The markets have corrected significantly since the rise followed by the budget. Is there a possibility for further correction, or is investing now, even though the PEs are high, a good decision? I'll tell you the second part after you answer.
Yeah, sure. So from an equity market perspective, yes, the problem is that this uncertain COVID wave, and we have highlighted in the concluding slide that this is one variable very difficult to predict. And I think Arvind had highlighted a few times that this is one thing which can take markets in any direction. Our only proposition is that if you're looking from a perspective of 3 years, we believe the fundamentals are in place, that earning growth should come back unless there is real big structural damage by COVID, which has a low likelihood. And some disruptive policies by the government, which again puts us behind a few years in terms of economic recovery. If those two things are taken care of, we don't see a reason why earning growth should not come back and cyclical recovery should not happen. We should attract foreign flows that should help economic recovery and equity markets as well. So the view, as I said, that if you are an investor, an STP type of investing is good. If market falls good, you have money to put in more. So that's the idea. So lump sum, I'm not sure, but yes, staggered investment, you can start and you can continue. Markets have not fallen sharply, I will not say. I think from the top, it's down 7%. with COVID cases falling and lockdown coming, there was a risk of falling a little more, but I think it's supported by buoyant global markets and the lack of surprise, and companies are well prepared. So that's the view. So that variable is very difficult to predict right now. So we cannot give a view of how equity markets will, what kind of returns equity market give in a year's time. But from a 3 years perspective, 5 years perspective, we know that I think Arvind in one of his slides said that corporate earning growth can be a certain level, and you can expect that kind of returns from equity investments over period of time.
Thanks, Saurabh. And the second part of the same question was, there are expectations of Joe Biden increasing tax rate in the near future. Will this lead to a FII sell-off?
It's very difficult. There are multiple tax kind of policies that they are changing. One is that they plan to tax the offshore money parked by large private American corporates, not private, but American corporates. So there is no clarity of how it happens and whether some Indian IT export companies also fall into that. So there is no clarity how that taxation will happen. That is the first part. And yesterday, I think they announced that they will have a very high tax rate of closer to 40% for capital gains for rich individuals or rich people. So we don't have any clarity of how that fallout happens. And if because of that there is a fall in US equity markets, it will have a it will have a rub-off effect in Indian equity markets, because it's, however, we talk about different variables for different markets, but again, the story broadly is that if US sneezes, the world catches cold, and in equity markets, it's still there. It's no two ways about it. So we will have a rub-off effect if equity markets fall sharply in US or developing markets. Whether you want to add something over here, since you have some macro view that you can add.
I mean, if global corporations face higher tax in the US, they will kind of look at other destinations, right? So I think India, short-term equity markets can move, and we should not be really bothered about it. For a country which is so underinvested in equities ourselves, every correction is an opportunity to add more to your equity allocation. India should be more bothered about how can we get those global corporations to invest in India. So the government's PLI scheme, the production linked incentive, seems to be a good one. I mean, their target, it's regulated, is targeted, but looks like it will draw in some investments from global corporations to set up companies and supply chains in India. It will help domestic companies also. That should be the big bother. We need to attract that long-term capital. So, instead of worrying about US taxes, I'll worry about Indian taxes. I mean, Indian taxes keep changing, the methodology keeps changing, and you make so many changes. What investors, whether it is equity investors or FDI investors, they need certainty. They need certainty that Indian rates will remain same. This is the policy, this is the reform, and these are the rates that will stay for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And then you will get the investments. I think we should be bothered about that more.
Thanks. So Saurabh, we've also gotten a couple of questions about ESG. So if you can share your view on ESG as a category, as well as a few insights about Quantum's ESG fund.
Yeah, sure. So ESG is a relatively new strategy that has emerged. So essentially, most equity investors have focused on the financial aspect of investment, but there are other stakeholders as well. So ESG as a strategy, it stands as environmental, social, and governance. So now the companies have to focus on all three categories, and there are enough funds now who have launched products on ESG. Globally, it's much bigger theme now, where companies are judged on all these three parameters, and based on these parameters, when these companies perform well on all these parameters, then only they become an investment case for much larger funds. And we have been interacting with a lot of pension funds where ESG has become a mandate across their equity investments. So more and more capital is now flowing through ESG. this whole sustainability thing is becoming bigger and bigger, and there are mandates from the boards of large pension funds to direct their investments toward ESG compliant companies. So this is how ESG stands, and we believe this will continue to be bigger and bigger. From a quantum ESG perspective, quantum within the value or equity product has also it's always focused on governance. So governance has been a primary focus of any equity investment that quantum does, even in the value fund. But here we in the ESG we have added two more layers of environment and social. So about 4 or 5 years ago, when this whole product, when our founder Ajit thought about this product, there were not many people who understood this in India, and relying on foreign publications or foreign indexes was something which we are not comfortable with, because there were some stocks which we believe that they are not ESG compliant, but they were large weights in that indexes. So Quantum set up its own team. We have a 6-member team on ESG. Look at companies. Now disclosure standards have started to improve on ESG, so that's making things easier. We have a proprietary investment framework. So what happens is in an equity value product that we have QLTF, we have valuations as a very important criteria, and governance and quality of business. When we move to ESG, we add two more parameters. Besides governance, we add social and environment aspects, but we remove the valuation aspect of the company. So the ESG strategy can invest in companies which may not come in valuation criteria of the value fund, on the belief that because if the company and the management is focused on ESG over long terms, they will think about all the stakeholders' returns, which include equity holders as well. So that's the basis on which that whole ESG product has been there. Over the last 1.5 years, I think the returns have been very, very good from the ESG product, and that again confirms that ESG companies have certain way of doing things, and even financially they will perform better over a period of time. So that's broadly on the ESG side. Arvind, do you want to add a few lines here?
So Saurabh covered why we did it. So for some of you who know, Quantum manages money for some of the largest sovereign wealth funds and global pension funds. And we could see in 2013-14 that these sovereign wealth funds, pension funds were moving towards investing, making their investments in companies or funds which look at this ESG, environment, social, and governance criteria. So as Saurabh said, we started our own proprietary research, because everything that Quantum does is proprietary. We don't depend on external research, and we built that team. But what began as a theme is now is almost like a DNA. I mean, everything that Quantum will have some ESG aspects. Like we're already giving out data on our own ESG, Quantum Advisors and Quantum owns companies' ESG metrics. You know, what is our carbon footprint and stuff like that. And globally also, what we think is this will be integrated. So ESG strategies, and every fund or every fund house or every company will be made to follow this broad ESG principles. So if you look at the top companies in India, they're already following this. Many of them give out something called business responsibility reports, and they track it, measure it. And as Saurabh said, disclosures are getting better. And the idea behind this fund is very simple. Companies which treat the environment well, which treat their employees and stakeholders and shareholders in a good manner, and which have very high governance in every aspect for dealing with themselves, dealing with the partner, dealing with the stakeholders, should do well. These companies will be rewarded by investors over a long period of time. And for many, this will not be a choice anymore. It will be mandatory. Like environment guidelines will be mandatory on almost all companies, irrespective of whether we call it ESG or not. Good companies will be on the forefront of it. Good companies, and this fund basically identifies those good companies. Meeting the managements, we're talking to them. Many good companies now have what is called sustainability team, where there's a team which looks at all these aspects. And good companies are already in the forefront of managing their environment, treating their shareholders properly, treating their staff properly, whether they have diverse staff, and having good governance. So I think this is it may not be a theme. This will become an integral part of any investment philosophy in the long term.
Thanks, Saurabh and Arvind. The next question is it a good time to invest in quantum equity fund of funds? And can you also suggest an optimal equity allocation between fund of funds, QLT, EVF, and ESG? Saurabh, this is for you.
Yeah, so fund of fund was curated to support the strategy that on equity investment that I alluded to in one of the slides. The idea is that when you are investing in equity markets through funds, there are different styles, and as our founder puts it, the different styles are nothing but different gods from where you want to achieve nirvana, basically. So you can go through value strategy, you can go through growth strategy, you can go through mid cap strategy. Ultimate aim is to achieve your financial goals. Now what happens in the intermediate periods, there will be value strategy which will not do that well for certain period of time. Sometimes growth does well, sometimes mid and small does well. So optimal allocation according to us, if you cannot plan it yourself, the idea is that about 20% of your equity allocation should be in a very good value oriented product which takes risk or capital kind of protection as a primary focus, and then equity returns. So about 20% allocation towards a value product like QLTEF, overlay of about close to 10% in your ESG product, which is a new theme, but it's something that we closely track and we believe that should do well over long periods of time. So 10% goes over there. And 70% of your allocation should be towards fund of funds, which then completes your basket, because fund of fund itself is a basket of growth strategies, mid cap strategies, large cap strategy. And it complements really well on the two products that I highlighted about quantum. So this should be your basket, and this is how it complements. So when over the last 6 months or 1 year, when QLTF has done very well, because there are different strategies in QFOF, which is not value, they have not done that well. So that basket keeps you in the game of your achieving your financial goals. So that's the approach. That's the approach you should have when you're trying to create a basket of equity.
To those who do not know, the QFOF is a quantum equity fund of funds, and that fund invests in other equity schemes of other mutual funds. So basically what Saurabh is telling is, technically, you can actually make 3 fund investments: QLTEF, the value fund, the quantum ESG equity fund, and the quantum equity fund of funds. 3 investments, and your entire equity allocation is done. So three SIPs, 3 STPs, and you're done. You don't really need to bother about sector funds, and everything is covered in these 3: diversified equity exposure. So you can make it really simple if you want. So you're investing in a quantum product, but 2 funds are quantum philosophy funds, and 1 quantum equity fund, which is your larger allocation, 70% of your equity allocation, is in other equity schemes of other fund houses, which are equally good, consistent. And we're not looking for the best performing fund in the equity fund of funds. We're looking for the most consistent fund, and do they have the same investment philosophy? What will they do? What's the research process? Everything that we do, we go and ask those fund managers, and based on the replies that they get and their consistent track record, we make that investment. So 3 investments and your diversified equity portfolio is done.
Thanks, Saurabh and Arvind. So just one of the last questions we'll be taking is a follow-up on that question. There are 2 more points related to QLT EVF. One, I know Saurabh, you explained during your presentation, but would you mind reiterating the cash component of the value fund?
Yeah, so as things stand right
also
now,
answer why the cash is not as much as typically in market peaks, the quantum value will have 12 to 15% cash, right? 10 to 15%. Why are we at 6 and 7? If you want to take that.
Yeah, Arvind, I also read that question in the chat room. So thanks for reminding me on that question. So currently the cash levels are closer to 6%, and there are questions that if markets have moved up so rapidly, why is the cash level not so high? So as Arvind very briefly highlighted there, that the markets is again in a 2-speed economy recovery, the markets are also 2-speed. So within our portfolio, there are few stocks which have come closer to sell. We have trimmed up in some of the sectors, but a lot of our companies which we own have reasonable upside still. And so that is the primary reason. And just a bit to explain how our process works is, very simply speaking, we have a buy and a sell level for each stock that we buy into based upon earnings and normalized P multiples for each company based upon their business model and the management quality and business quality. So as the stocks come closer to sell, once we buy it at a buy level or below buy level, and we hold that, and when the catalysts play out, the stock starts to move close to kind of sell level. As it moves to sell level, we start to trim, right? So over the last 6-9 months, what has happened when we bought these names at March, the earning estimates that we did, the companies have done much better than that. And that was the whole point that I've been highlighting over the presentation, that earning upgrades have driven stock returns and not only P multiple expansion. That is one of the primary reasons you see that the cash levels are lower compared to previous cycles where earning upgrade moved a little slower compared to the multiple expansion and stocks reached at the sell level. So that is the primary reason that you see that our cash levels are closer to 6%, because quite a few of the stocks still are giving us decent upside. So we continue to hold them. There has been no change in the process whatsoever, and we continue to follow the very similar process what we've been following over the years.
And with that, the last question is again related to QLTVF. If you can just shed some light on the performance of QLTVF. It's been a little volatile. It's had a trajectory where it's performed very well, and in recent times it's not performed very well. So if you can just conclude the overall performance of the QLTVF.
Yeah, Raina. So I tried to highlight that fact when I was talking about value strategy not doing well, and when does value does well and when value does not do well. Quantum long-term equity value, as the name suggests, is a value product. So over the last 5 years, closer to 3.5 years was a period where economy was growing very slowly. And in this slowing economy, what happens is that not every company can grow, right? Because there is not enough tailwind from the economy. So few companies in every sector are growing faster than the broader economy or gaining market share and growing. What happens is that these industry leaders now, because there is enough liquidity coming and people want growth, a lot of money starts to pour in those names, right? And the valuation multiples of these companies continue to move on. So the on a little bit of extra growth, market is ready to give a large premium. That is what has happened in 2017, 18, 19. For a value manager, it is very difficult to buy those names because they are not value. So it's pricing to perfection, but there could be extended periods where these companies do well. Just to give you an example, one of these financial companies which have done very well over the last 4 or 5 years, at the start of 2019, that stock was trading at 6 times price to book. And anybody who understands valuation, 6 times price to book is kind of an unheard number for assigning to any very good business also, especially on the NBFC side or the bank side. When the year ended, it was trading at 12 times price to book, right? So that's the difficulty that we are with. Similarly, a very big, largest organized jewelry player over last 5 years, if I exclude this year, its EBITDA has grown 0%. The stock trades at 70 times, right? Because liquidity was coming in, people wanted to park their money in best quality companies. The multiples have been expanded, and those companies continued to do well despite high valuations. And that is the reason, because those were not in the portfolio. The fund performance was not that great in 2017, 18, and 19. 2020 post-COVID fall, things have changed for us. First is that companies which were market leaders in their specific sectors, we have been able to buy them at good valuations, which we have been waiting for a few years now, right? So those companies we added. Secondly, as I've been highlighting, the move in the equity markets have been driven partly by liquidity and partly by earning upgrade, right? So that is when that part of rally happens in equity markets, which is driven by earning upgrade and liquidity. At that point in time, value funds tend to do well, and cyclicals have also started to improve as macroeconomy starts to improve. So those are the reasons that you're seeing that the performance is coming back. From here on, if it's a corporate earning led rally, then the fund performance should improve. But again, if it stalls and then again it's only liquidity driven rally where PE multiples continue to expand, we have to trim, and there would be increased cash in the portfolio, which could drag the performance till the time it mean reverts. I hope I answered that question.
Yes, thank you so much, Saurabh.
Thank you.
So with this, we have come to an end of the Q&A session. I'm now handing over the floor to each speaker for closing remarks. So we'll start with you, Arvind.
We have spoken enough on the macroeconomy and markets. I would yet again go back and talk to you about health and family. I think priority for everyone right now should be friends and colleagues, right? So just be safe, take care of them. If you can help, a lot of people will again need help, both in terms of support, incomes, donations, so whatever you can do your bit, but most importantly, try and be as safe as you can, and spend as much time as you can with your family and people. That is priority. All this growth and, incomes and jobs and career will be always be there. We'll wait. But more importantly is to safeguard yourself right now, and be as safe as you can. So thank you so much for coming and listening to this. Saurabh, you have any comments?
Yeah, very similar thoughts, Arvind. I hope the session was helpful to everyone. Arvind, and I've tried to focus on the pertinent questions that you have in mind in this rather uncertain environment. And as Arvind said, economic factors and economic news and knowledge is not important at this point in time. The focus should be on health, and both physical health and mental health, because the kind of news that is floating around, it's very easy to get bogged down and feel miserable. So just we need to hold on each other and take care of ourselves. Thank you for the session. Thank you, Arvind. Thank you, Raina.
Thank you, Saurabh, thank you, Arvind, and thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar. Our speakers have tried to answer most of your questions. However, in case you have any further queries, please get in touch with us. You can visit our website on www.quantumamc.com or get in touch with our customer support team. Thanks, stay safe and stay healthy. Signing off. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.